Hello, this is Dave Sugarbaker. It's the first Sunday in May, May 5th, 2024. And I have this particular story from Gospel of Luke. And the Pharisees and the scribes were grumbling and saying, "This fellow welcomes sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. "Which one of you, having 100 sheep and losing one of them, does not leave the 99 in the wilderness and go after the one that is lost until he finds it? When he has found it, he lays it on his shoulders and rejoices. And when he comes home, he calls together his friends and neighbors, saying to them, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep that was lost.' Jesus says, I tell you, there will be more joy in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous persons who need no repentance. Or what woman having 10 silver coins, if she loses one of them, does not light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? When she has found it, she calls together her friends and neighbors, saying, 'Rejoice with me, for I have found the coin that I had lost.' Just so, I tell you, there is joy in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." The Bible represents human beings' struggle to come to terms with who and how and what is God. It's a library, and sometimes a single book will contain stories representing different traditions within the larger compass of Judaism. That's the Old Testament. Particularly the book of Genesis does that. Different books of the Old Testament and the New Testament may present differing understandings of how God interacts with human beings in this world. In the Old Testament, we can find God as the God of the volcano and the God of the storm. And then there's God as the God of war, or God as king, or God as the judge and the lawgiver. Or in the New Testament, God of grace and God of love. It's not that God has changed over time, but rather that human beings have evolved and refined their understanding of God over time. If I have to choose, I'm going to listen to Jesus and his teaching about who and how God is. But to see the difference, let's take a sample from the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses, and a story that Jesus tells. First, this is from the heart of the Jewish law, dictated by God, and obeying it is insisted on by all the religious authorities, right? Okay. If someone has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father and mother, who does not heed them when they discipline him, then his father and his mother shall take hold of him and bring him out to the elders of his town at the gate of that place. They shall say to the elders of the town, 'This son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard.' And then all the men of the town shall stone him to death. So you shall purge the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear and be afraid." That's, if you want to look it up, that's Deuteronomy 21, 18 to 21. It seems to me that that's a pretty drastic way to handle teenage rebellion. But that's what the Torah says about how you should handle a stubborn and rebellious son. In Old Testament times, obeying the law was obeying the will of God. Now hold on to this thought about what it means to obey the law of God in the Old Testament, and we'll compare it to a teaching story from Jesus about what God is like. This is Luke 15. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger of them said to his father, "Father, give me the share of the property that will belong to me." If he wasn't the firstborn son, he gets 1/3 of the property. The firstborn son gets 2/3. After a few days, the younger son gathered all that he had and traveled to a distant country, and there he squandered his property in dissolute living. When he had spent everything, a severe famine took place throughout that country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed his pigs. He would gladly have filled himself with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired hands have bread enough and to spare, but here I am dying of hunger? I will get up and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me like one of your hired hands.' So he set off and went to his father. But while he was still far off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. He ran out and put his arms around him and kissed him. Then the son said to him," and this was the apology speech that he had rehearsed, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his slaves, "Quickly, bring out a robe, the best one, and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet, and get the fatted calf and kill it, and let us eat and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." And they began to celebrate. Now his elder son was in the field, and when he came and approached the house, he heard music and dancing. He called one of the slaves and asked what was going on. He replied, "Your brother has come, and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has got him back safe and sound." Then he became angry and refused to go in. His father came out and began to plead with him, but he answered his father, "Listen, for all these years I have been working like a slave for you, and I have never disobeyed your command. Yet you have never given me even a young goat so that I might celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours came back, who has devoured your property with prostitutes, you killed the fatted calf for him." Then the father said to him, "Son, you are always with me, and all that is mine is yours. But we had to celebrate and rejoice because this brother of yours was dead and has come to life. He was lost and has been found." I identify with Jesus, God of love and forgiveness and welcome, rather than the Old Testament approach of stoning the recalcitrant son to death because of what God's law says we ought to do. Jesus doesn't say anything about the father needing someone to pay for the sins of his younger son before accepting him back into the household. The loving father isn't planning on taking his sinful son to the town elders to be stoned to death. The older brother might have thought that that was a pretty good approach to take. That would be obedience to the law, and the older brother is big into obedience. But there's no mention of killing someone to balance the debt of sin that the son has acquired. Kind of a stench that follows him around like the stench of the pigs. I believe that the pig food eating son has already earned his punishment, and the dad knew it. So I choose to listen to Jesus rather than the old Jewish law. Also, beyond that, if I get a chance, I listen to Jesus instead of Paul. I think Paul, at some points in his writings, fell back into his Jewish training as a Pharisee when he wrote that God needed somebody to die for the sins of humankind, and that's why Jesus was crucified. I came across a quote. Catherine Tanner, a prominent Yale theologian whose broader theological commitments emphasize the unconditional love and grace of God toward humanity, critiques the traditional doctrine of sacrificial atonement, which holds that Jesus' death was a sacrifice that satisfied the wrath of God over human sin. She suggests that such theories of atonement can depict God as bound by some sort of external necessity or some legal requirement to punish sin somehow, which she argues is not compatible with the idea of God's sovereignty and the freedom of divine grace. Tanner proposes that God's relationship with humanity is not based on a justice that requires retribution or payment for human sinfulness. In her view, the crucifixion of Jesus should not be seen as a necessary precondition for God's forgiveness of sinful human beings, but as a profound demonstration of God's love. Tanner's perspective, this little article that I found says, Tanner's perspective shifts the focus from atonement as satisfaction of justice to atonement as an expression of divine love that brings about human transformation. We can find a lot of things in the library that we call the Bible, but the Bible is not a single clear outline of what we are to believe. We need to balance what we read in the library with our own experience of God and our own experience of love. Now, God bless you. If you find value in this, I'd appreciate it if you'd pass it along. And take care. I'll see you soon.